Now, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has met incumbent or outgoing President Joe Biden after the latter invited him to the White House, beginning the customary transfer of power process. Trump thanked President Biden for pledging a smooth transfer of power. This just days after the Republican returned to power with a sweeping mandate as the 47th elected President of the United States. Trump said, and I quote, "Politics is tough, and in many cases, it's not a very nice world. It is a nice world today, and I appreciate it very much."
I very much appreciate that, Jim.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
So this was earlier today when President-elect Donald Trump was at the White House. It was all smiles when he greeted and spoke to the outgoing President of the United States, Joe Biden. We are still waiting for communication from either of the two outside the White House. We do understand that there are two events that are currently going on at this hour. We also understand that the Vice President-elect, J.D. Vance, is at the GOP because there's an election for the Republicans there. And also, someone who's missing in action is the First Lady, or the former First Lady, now to become First Lady again, Melania Trump, is missing in this trip of Trump. Let's talk to our correspondent, Susan Teherani, who's joining us in New York. Susan, a lot is happening in Washington, D.C. We have the incoming president, Donald Trump, meeting the outgoing president and saying that it is a changing world. And we also have another event at the Congress and also something else that is very, I don't know how to say, peculiar. Melania Trump missing from this trip.
Yeah, so Melania Trump's office said that she did not want to have that traditional tea time with Jill Biden. Sources say she's still extremely disappointed and upset and felt personally violated after the FBI raided their home Mar-a-Lago, going into her private drawers, going into Barron's room. Despite the fact that the Bidens said they did not have prior knowledge to that, she equates that to the Biden Justice Department. That's one of the reasons she just didn't want to go near there. And besides, you know, she's a former First Lady. I'm not sure if she really needed that tour, but she also didn't want to give this satisfaction to an administration where she believes has been very unfair, not only to her husband, but also to her family as well.
Susan, I'm seeing the press outside the premises of the White House. Do we expect either of the teams from Biden or Trump to speak to the press?
Let's see. I see microphones out set, and that's what we're hoping for. Whether or not it'll be from President Biden's team is unlikely. You know, they'll have a press. The press secretary will speak to the media shortly, and they have spokespersons, the regular scheduling in the White House. We'll have to see what happens with the president-elect's team and whether or not Donald Trump himself wants to talk to the press or not. But nonetheless, as you mentioned, Eric, this is a historic day before our eyes. We are watching history unfold here in the United States. What a comeback story it was for President-elect Donald Trump, and what a ride it's been for President Joe Biden himself. He's not only welcoming a new president to the White House, he's also perhaps saying goodbye to a career that has spanned decades prior to Donald Trump even thinking of becoming president. So it's definitely a bittersweet day for him and his family as well.
Interesting day and interesting time in Washington, D.C. Susan Teherani, stay with me because I want us to engage on another topic. Donald Trump has not even formally begun his second stint in office yet, but he is already talking about a possible third term. The president-elect made these comments ahead of a meeting with Joe Biden at the White House. While addressing supporters and GOP lawmakers, the president-elect hinted at another term in the White House, suggesting that it will take cascading changes to law in order for that to happen. Now, remember, the Constitution does not allow for a leader to serve more than 2 terms in office. Trump made the speech shortly after landing in Washington, D.C., just before his meeting with Biden at the White House. Meanwhile, a transition of power is already underway in the U.S. Congress. Both chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives, held their first session days after U.S. voters handed a clear and decisive mandate to Donald Trump. The Republican Party has gained majority in the Senate. As for the lower chamber, it is slowly turning red as Republicans inch closer to a majority. At the moment, Republicans are just 2 seats short of majority, with the result on 12 seats yet to be called. With Donald Trump having complete control at the White House and in the Congress, it remains to be seen how the first 2 years of his term pan out, not just for policy changes like immigration, but for critical constitutional provisions being overtaken. Susan, let me go back to you. Like I said, there are 2 events that are happening today in Washington, D.C. The Congress lower chamber is meeting. We have senators there. We have the governors there also meeting at the same time. Tell us the significance of the GOP and why J.D. Vance is present there.
Well, ultimately, someone will have to take J.D. Vance's seat as Ohio senator. That's one thing regarding J.D. Vance on Capitol Hill. Another issue is that President-elect Donald Trump, as you mentioned earlier, was there as well. J.D. Vance is standing back as his representative to talk to lawmakers over there. Remember, Congress, when it comes to the hands of Republicans, which likely it will have a very slim majority. It will be very difficult to pass laws. So right now, all planning, all hands on deck, planning is taking place to try to make this as smooth as possible. They have a big challenge coming up in December, and that's passing a spending bill. Then also the issue of unity among members, despite the fact that we see this sort of all-out support for President Trump. His agenda isn't always very popular among all Republicans on Capitol Hill. So, these are issues that they have to hammer out, talk about. President-elect Trump was there with J.D. Vance before meeting President Biden, and he was endorsing Speaker Johnson to continue being the speaker. They sort of want to have a vote. They want to have Donald Trump sort of give his blessings to it, if you may, instead of just, sweeping into that. So there's just things like that are happening. And as you mentioned, it'll be interesting to see what the next 2 years hold. It's usually these first 2 years when there is unity among the government that a lot can be done, and a lot of shortcomings happen at the end of 2 years as well, where one chamber ultimately is given to the opposite party. So they have a limited amount of time, not only just the first 100 days, but those 2 years are going to be very important. Yes.
Susan, there's a point that I jumped before I asked about what is happening in the Congress, and the President-elect Donald Trump was at the Congress lower chamber, and he said, and I'll quote him, "I won't be running again unless you say he's good. We got to figure something else." He was sort of saying that he's ready for a third term.
Yeah, it's funny. I was listening to interviews from his close allies immediately after that, and from reporters that were close to that room. They said that the mood was jovial, and it was meant to be funny. It was meant to be a joke. Well, we never know. It's hard to imagine if President-elect Trump is thinking about something like that, considering his age and all the difficulties he went through. But, you never know. Politics is always surprising us. But for what it's worth, it appears that was a joke. So we'll have to wait and see.
Joke indeed. Let's see if Trump really means what he says this time around, because his last 4 years were dominated by statements and jokes sometimes which turned out to be true. Thank you very much, Susan Teherani. We'll have to leave it there. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.